Great.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at Living Great Real Estate. And our feature speaker this afternoon is Jeff Greif, or Grief. Forgive
Right.
me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, Jeffrey, from First American Title Insurance Company, who will talk about title searches on properties that agents are in transactions with, how the title being clear impacts, the deal going smoothly or, just blowing up in everybody's face, how it's absolutely essential to have a very good title company in your back to make sure that the title is clear, there are no clouds on the title. And maybe, Jeff, if you don't mind, explain a little bit about what title is, maybe give us a little bit of information about your background, who you are, who you work with, what makes you guys so different, and then maybe some of the challenges that we're seeing right now during the coronavirus, if you are seeing extra challenges that are a little unusual. Jeff, please. Thank you for
We
joining us.
are. I want to thank you all for having me join you this afternoon. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Evelyn, and thank you, Alan, for helping to coordinate this. Just to give you a little bit of background on me, I've been in the business now for 33 years, and I've seen a lot of changes in this business. Just to give you a little bit of background, I started with a company by the name of General Land Abstract. We were an independent abstract company, but we were the largest in the state. And it's one of the reasons why First American acquired us about 20 years ago. And just to tell you briefly a little bit about the title insurance industry, as you all know, there are tens of thousands of small agents all across the country, independent agents. All of the national title companies do business with these small independent agents that source business, and then the national title companies underwrite the title insurance policy. And when I say title insurance policy, when anybody asks me what do we do in the title insurance business, the best way that I can think of to explain that is that we make sure that the property that people think they're buying is actually the property that they're buying. It's a pretty good explanation, right? We were an independent agent, but we were First American's largest agent in the state of New Jersey. They acquired us, and we became what's known as a direct operation. Every national title company has a direct operation in every state in the country. And as luck would have it, First American did not have a direct operation in the state of New Jersey. So they acquired us, which has been fantastic for us, fantastic for our clients, and especially post 2008, 2009, there's been a flight to quality. And now with this new economic challenge, I would imagine that there would be even more so a flight to quality of not only service, but also trust and clout in handling the monies that are being run through our trust account. When I started 30 years ago, the attorneys, for the most part, ran the monies through their trust account. And now, as you all know, it's the title entities that are responsible for wiring, holding monies in escrow. And when I say reducing risk, I can't stress enough how important it is to have a direct operation like us in being responsible for secure emails, secure wiring, and for secure holding of monies in escrow, as opposed to a small independent agent who you may not know if they're going to be around in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. There's been a lot of changes in this industry, and a lot of the small agents just can't handle the vicissitudes of the marketplace when things drop. So it's been wonderful for us, and First American has tremendous, spend millions of dollars every year, I will tell you, on making sure that the wiring is secure, emails is secure. And I hear horror stories out there, I'm sure you all have, where monies are, emails are hacked or wiring instructions are not secure, and then $10,000 or $40,000 disappears and never to be found again. It's awful. So some of my clients and prospects tell me these horror stories. You'll sleep better knowing that we're holding your monies in escrow because we're a Fortune 500 multinational corporation. And you know what? I wasn't even going to talk about this, but I will give you a really good example of what I'm talking about. Because First American is a multinational corporation, about 2-3 months ago, they saw what was happening with their offices in Asia and Europe. And they took some very definitive steps in the United States about 6 to 8 weeks ago, setting up independent offices, home offices, issuing laptops to all of our staff so that in the event, and we all know what's happened now, in the event that the governments had suggested home quarantine or limited quarantine at the beginning, we had literally within 3 or 4 hours, we had 98% of our people in New Jersey set up with home offices with their own laptops, secure VPN for emails, wiring. We were ready to hit the road running. And I can't imagine that there's any independent small agent out there who was as quick and responded as we did. So I have to tell you,
Jeff, can I just say something? That's amazing. We just did one of these Empower Hours on what's called business continuity planning, where it says when you see a risk, first you identify some of these risks, and then you identify how to go about securing it, and then you go into emergency mode. And to have that in place that quickly, I'm sure they had in the background, because it is such a sophisticated company, in the background to be ready, emergency, how do we switch it out? And for a company like yours to, set that up that fast is really that they had a lot in place. So that only shows the integrity of what they could do in the regular time also,
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to tell you, I was recently speaking to a regional manager yesterday, and I said, when the dust settles with this, I'm going to call a couple of the C-level managers that I know out in California. I've played golf with these guys a couple of times over the years. I'm going to call them and tell them how impressed I was, because they reacted and everybody had their home laptops. It was fantastic. Yeah. Staffing, our people are trained. And also a lot of the small agents, what they do is they outsource wiring, they outsource their settlement services. All of our people are trained by First American. We report to corporate in California. So you'll sleep better knowing if you're using our firm. And in addition to that, something that both Alan and Evelyn and myself have spoken about, because I've been in the business for so long and I have this tremendous company behind me, I do a really good job of helping my clients to connect with one another. And that's why, Jeff, we were talking at the beginning, I would love to follow up with you because I know a lot of real estate attorneys, a lot of realtors. I'm very active in some of the networking groups. And when it's appropriate, I'd love to introduce you to some of my realtor and real estate attorney clients and friends in the business, because you never know. Maybe I can help you to source some business.
Okay.
It'd be my pleasure to do so.
Okay, sounds good.
Great, thank you.
So Jeff, can I just ask you real quick? Can you just take us quickly for a tour, a typical title, from beginning to end, for some of our newer agents? Would you mind please engaging us?
I don't mind at all.
Thank you.
It all starts with the realtor, of course. You're finding the homes for the people, you know the clients, you know what their needs are. Once the contract is either finalized or close to being finalized, that's when I get involved. The real estate attorney representing the buyer will forward to me the contract, and any of the lender if there is a loan, any of the lender requirements. And our responsibilities are twofold. One is the title side, where we search the public records, whether it be state, federal, and local, or both, all of those, to find out what liens may be on the property, encroachments, taxes, assessments, judgments, upper and lower court judgments. We will we'll search what's known as a chain of title. We'll usually go back 60 years, sometimes 80 years, and every once in a while, 120 years or more, which is kind of interesting. And like I said at the beginning, we make sure that the property that your clients think they're buying is actually the property that they are buying. And when people ask me for some examples of that, I always say something to the effect, I look like a pretty trustworthy person. If I were selling my home and I told you I only had one mortgage on my property, you would trust me, right? Sometimes there's a second mortgage on the property. And sometimes it's not even people, you know what? Sometimes when it comes to like judgments, for example, sometimes people sign an affidavit. They say, oh, that $1,500 judgment is not me. Sometimes people forget. I mean, sometimes people are not being on the up and up, but most times people forget. They think they had approval for the encroachment, or they forgot that they share a driveway with their next door neighbor. I've seen crazy things.
Or that they owe child support or something like that, or that there's a construction lien that,
right,
was put on at the beginning of their home ownership 35 years ago or whatever, that they completely forgot about.
Or they owed a dentist $700
right.
15, 20 years ago, and they completely forgot about it.
I know that oftentimes, I get involved in, getting those deficiencies either wiped out or renegotiated. Do you, as an agency and as a general practice, come in on that side ever, or are you pretty much just, advising the agents, the realtors, and the attorneys that there is this cloud, I guess, if you want to call it, and, do you say, go ahead, you guys deal with it, or do you ever come in on that to get that?
At that point, after we bring it to everybody's attention, it's rare that we would be asked to come in further and help with the negotiation, other than just providing proof. But there are some times when, if there's a situation that goes to court and people need us to provide for affidavits of what we have learned in searching the public records, we'll get involved. Okay. Especially if there's a claim, then we're definitely involved.
Right. Right. What about things like tax liens, federal tax liens? I did a foreclosure not that long ago. We were like clear to close, presumably, we thought. And then we were told literally like 3 days before that, hey, guess what? There's an $85,000 tax lien on this property.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't going to underwrite. The lenders were saying, we're not going to underwrite the loan. The title company was saying, we don't know what to tell you. We can't give you clear title. Attorneys were saying, we're not sure. So I kind of got into it, in the trenches with, the previous servicing company, I guess, as it were, that packaged the foreclosure. And I had to kind of, do some finagling there to try to get that settled before we could close. But that was pretty messy. And that was, whose fault was that? That was, the attorney's fault to put it together, the title company for not seeing it at early stage to give us, a little bit more, headroom to figure out what we could do about it. But
Mm-hmm.
do you ever find situations like that?
Oh, yes. Well, people, often I'm asked, what are the insurances based on? Every case is different. And our level of involvement, depending upon what the attorneys, if it gets to that point, if there's a lawsuit, what our involvement is. But I've seen some really interesting cases over the. I had one recently that I'd love to share with you all.
Please, yeah.
I had recently a commercial transaction in Hudson County, a rather large transaction when all is said and done. I hope it closes. When all is said and done, could be upwards of 250 or $260 million transaction. But I love telling the story because it shows you what kind of experts we have on staff and how they're trained by corporate. We had a transaction where there was an abandoned railroad, no big deal, but we found a strip that was about 12 feet wide, going about close to a mile. And there was a cloud on whether or not who it was that owned that strip. And it was just assumed by both of the attorneys, and I could understand why, that it was part of the abandoned railroad. Well, our title officer went back 80 years, went back 100 years, couldn't find ownership of that.
Understandably so.
Right. Had to go back more than 120 years, believe it or not. And in the meantime, the seller's attorney got kind of cute, contacted his title company, and they said, no problem, we'll take the risk. It's a large transaction. I didn't want to lose that. So my client, God bless him, said to me, Reif, I want you to keep the title work on this, but you have 2 weeks to figure it out. So at least they gave us 2 weeks.
They gave you 2 weeks.
Gave us 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
we went back, and it turned out that there was another title entity that said that they would take the risk on it. It turned out that 120 some odd years ago, somebody had the foresight to buy that strip from the state or the feds when the railroad was
Or the local cowboy that owned it.
exactly, and thinking that at some point someone was going to find it valuable to cross from the main road towards the river. Now, he's long gone, but his family still owns that strip.
Oh.
We were able to bring it to the attention of our client so they could negotiate with the family an easement onto the property.
Did the family even know they owned it?
They did. They did
Okay.
know that they owned it, but it was difficult to track it and find the correct information. We did, and they negotiated for I think $80,000 for an easement across this 12-foot wide strip. Now here's the thing: had that other title entity insured, and then the developer of our client built a $260 million multifamily mixed-use project on this property, someone was going to come knock on their door and say, you're crossing my property, it's yours. It wasn't going to be an $80,000 negotiation. It probably would have been $5 or $10 million. So what we do is very important. And I've seen some crazy things. I mean, I remember, and there was a transaction many years ago where I think it was Jersey City, might have been Hoboken, where there was a person with a very common name like Jack Smith. I think it was Jack Smith. I think it was John Smith, and he owned the property, and he let his son live in the house while he was semi-retired and went down to Florida. The son, who had the same name, sold the property.
Oh, God.
And then absconded with the funds. Now, we stepped in, we paid the current owner, the person who had bought the property, and then went after the son. I don't know if they ever found him. But I see some crazy things. I mean, I've seen surveys where people make statements that they're on an acre of property, but they're really on 3/4 of property, or easements. Or I've seen fence, concrete, 6-foot concrete fences built on neighbors' properties. So it doesn't happen often, but when it does, you need the right title entity to find out the information and back the policy. I've seen.
Yeah. What about in the case where you have to go back, say, as you just gave us a very good example of going back 150 years.
Mm-hmm.
What if you have to go back even further and you're reliant on, county records that were all handwritten then, and hopefully someone still has them somewhere in the archives, and then, someone that has them in those archives, has a legible copy. Where you have to rely on that record. That would be the deal breaker maker. How do you, who's making the decision there?
I love that you're asking that question, because there are times when we have to make a risk determination.
Right.
And each individual search is different, of course. However, with the size of our company and the clout that we have, we're able to take bigger risks than just a small agent. A lot of the small agents have limitations on how much of a policy, what decisions they can make. We don't have any of those problems. We, as owned by the underwriter, we can, our title officers can make those determinations. But I will tell you, we're involved with a search now in Brooklyn on the water, where we've had to go back into the search goes back into the 1800s, because two of the streets that are crisscross on this particular part, it's a large property. We needed to confirm who owns it and what the state's responsibility is. We have to go back into
the riparian rights that were involved in that search.
Oh, yes.
And so with that, and having had to go back so far, you've got to take into consideration the change of the tide and the rising of the earth and all that stuff. And how do you factor all that stuff in there? You've got to go back historically with some real intricacy.
Yes. In fact, you know what? Hoboken, interestingly enough, is like 85% riparian, because it's all built on the river.
Right.
Like 85%. I was shocked when I learned that.
That must be fun.
So when we do a search in Hoboken, we need, we almost invariably need to confirm whether or not there are riparian rights involved. So yeah, it can get complicated and really interesting.
Yeah.
And believe me, our title officers love those searches, because
yeah, it's exciting. I can imagine.
Exactly.
I love doing something like that.
Yes.
Okay. And yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jeff.
Yeah, just to continue to answer your question of before, is that we prepare the search, we go back into the county records, and we make sure that everything's cleaned up prior to the actual closing. And if there's anything that needs to be negotiated on the part of the attorneys, we provide them with the information necessary. Now, I said there were two parts to what we're doing. The first part is searching the public records to make sure that, as I say, the property that the people think they're buying is actually the property that they're buying. Number two is the settlement services. We need to make sure that we coordinate not only with the title side, the binder that's been prepared by our underwriter to make sure what kind of risks we may or may not be willing to take, what easements there are on the property, what needs to be cleaned up at the closing as far as judgments, easements, liens, and that's all coordinated with our settlement services side as well, to make sure that everything, all the proper documents are recorded in the county court or state or federal. There's a federal lien, for example. So our settlement services department not only coordinates with our title search side, but also they're coordinating with the lender, the realtor, the homeowner, the prospective purchaser, to make sure that all the funds are wired properly and securely. And then post-closing, all of the documentation is recorded appropriately as well and confirmed with both sides.
Do you ever have any discrepancy where there's, you know, a survey that's presented to you by the agent, for example, during that first initial package email sent to you to commence the whole, you know, transaction, and you know the survey is from the seller, and that's what they were given at their close, however long ago that was. And there's an issue of an encroachment, a driveway that's not an official driveway. It's a strip of land between two houses on either side, and one house to the right has an official driveway. The house to the left that has the strip of land, it's not a driveway, but they're using it as a driveway. The owner next to them has that right of easement or whatever. They own that strip of land, but they've given the license or the verbal agreement to that property owner to the left saying you can use it as your driveway. Now the property on the right is selling that property. The issue comes up on the survey where, wait a minute, this is an encroachment, but this isn't the exact boundary that my surveyor, that my buyer wanted to undertake a new survey questioning this encroachment and the survey and having new findings. And then what happens is that a whole mess ensues as a result of a discrepancy on the survey.
Yes.
And so now the buyer wants to pull out. Seller says, what the hell are you talking about? We've given the right to this property A on the left to use it as a driveway. It's our it's our property.
Right.
But, you know, it's how would you deal with something like that?
I have seen this. It's funny. I've seen this more times than I would have thought over the years.
I just had a deal like that. What a mess.
It can be a mess.
Especially because the buyer was military. And he dotted his I's and crossed his T's, went to that property on numerous occasions, found the boundaries and everything, and questioned the title company to the nth degree, saying that, you know, it's not that. I don't care what the survey says. This is what my survey says, and it was a mess. So yeah, how do you guys? I'm just curious.
It can be a mess. You know, the most important thing is that a property needs an owner needs access to the property, right? So the courts almost always look favorably upon that question, because you can't have a property that you can't get on, right? Now, in the event that a property owner gives access by easement to that strip to their neighbor, and it's documented in the deed, there's really not much they can do about it. Even subsequent owners need to abide by that description in the deed. I don't see any way around it. They can complain about it, but I don't see how they can get around it. Was that your experience?
Yeah, just very recently we killed the deal, in fact, because the buyer was very determined to prove the attorney and the title company wrong, that the survey that was done for the original owner that was actually passed down to him some 100 years ago had all these discrepancies in it, that the land had grown, you know, that they covered the ground with pavement to extend that land onto yet a third property in the backyard, and that he wanted the person that the seller was giving the easement permission to on the left to sign off that upon their passing, that easement becomes null and void, and that property is fully reverting back to that party. And he wanted the parameters to be exactly framed out. It was a mess. So I just said, you know what, guys, this is not going to work. We're killing the deal.
I don't see how it would revert.
He was convinced that the easement was more than face value, that it had, because of, land growing, water pushing earth, the pavement, it was a very, very convoluted and crazy situation based on the discrepancy of the original survey that the seller gave, which was very old in county records back in the day, that to the buyer, who was military, was not concise enough. And I understood. I had to take his side, obviously. I mean, he explained it very thoroughly, and he had a claim that was legitimate, I felt. Yet you cannot impose the homeowner next door to sign off on something that for the last X amount of years he has had no problems with, but
Right.
that it did exist according to the new survey.
Especially more than 20 years. Adverse possession.
Yeah. So these are some of the issues and challenges that can come up that, agents have to be aware of. And,
Yes.
you have to know how to.
If it's on the deed, it's not even a question. If it's adverse possession, then you go to the court. But
depends on who, how much trouble you want to deal, how much stuff do you want to get involved in with this? It can be, super intricate, and I mean, is it worth it? Just buy another property, unless you absolutely must have this piece of property. But whenever you got that easement, that's kind of, it's not a set driveway. In this particular incident, it was just a separation of the two properties at some point in time. Somebody must have subdivided it and left this strip of land thinking they would sell it as a driveway to the adjoining property. Never did. It became that an easement encroachment. And, for the sake of the length of the seller's life, he got to enjoy it, but he was leaving now, and he was leaving a mess. So
also, you don't want to move into a new house where your neighbor's an adversary, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what he said. He made that a point. The buyer says, well, geez, I'm going to move in here and they're going to hate me from the get-go.
Right.
That's a good point, so.
You know what, Evelyne? It's interesting. I'll also mention, when it comes to the title insurance policy, because that's when we finish, right? The title searches are done. The settlement services department takes care of whatever wiring and recording needs to be done. Then we issue the title insurance policy, and the policy ensures, again, that the people own exactly the property that they know they own. Okay. What I would highly recommend is advising your clients to always hold on to their title insurance policy. I think it's really important. I'll tell you why, because a couple of things. First of all, title insurance companies by law are only supposed to hold on to the policies or a copy of the policy for 7 years. After that, they no longer have to hold on to the policy. However, sometimes, and it's rare, but hey, all insurance, right? When you're making a claim, you're always hoping you don't have a claim. But what people think is once they sell the property, they're done. Their responsibility with the property is in somebody else's hands. Title insurance is forever. That policy protects the owner forever. So let's say you owned a property for 7 years and then you moved out, and then you moved into another property, and 3 years later or 10 years later or God knows what, there's a discrepancy in the title that may affect you. And even if it doesn't, you might be brought into a lawsuit anyway. What are the chances of that happening? It's probably not going to happen. But if it did, that's why we buy insurance, right? I'm going to live forever, but I have a life insurance policy.
Is that applicable as well, Jeff? If there is a discrepancy, using this discrepancy word again, that there's something in the survey that is transferred from seller to new buyer. Survey is, and a new survey is done later on because somebody decides they want to put a pool in their backyard, and they remove the stakes and now we don't know where the boundaries are anymore.
Right.
You know, is that?
That's an example of what could happen, but it could be just about anything. And the title policy also protects you from having to hire counsel to protect yourself. So if you might be brought into a lawsuit because everybody's getting brought into a lawsuit, a particular lawsuit. All right. If you've got the title insurance policy that you threw up into your attic just to hold on to, dust it off, present it to the title insurance company, then then they have to hire counsel. If you can't find your title insurance policy and don't remember who the title insurance company was, and you're brought into a lawsuit for a home that you owned 5 years ago or 10, you got to hire counsel. Now, you might win the lawsuit, but you end up spending money on hiring counsel, as opposed to presenting the title insurance policy and saying, hey, I moved out of this place 7 years ago, but I'm being brought into a lawsuit. Here, now it's your headache, not mine.
Okay.
Title insurance company has to uphold that policy. So
Does it have an expiration on it, or is it the life of the owner, or?
yeah, forever.
Forever, okay.
Forever,
As long as the title company is still in business, forever.
Yes. And
so they can uphold their, their contract.
Well, I will tell you that it has happened, when title insurance companies go under, doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. Each title insurance company that backs a policy pays a certain percentage of money to the state's Department of Insurance to back policies of title insurance companies that go under. In New Jersey, several years ago, after or during the 2008-2010 economic challenge, New Jersey Title went out of business for claims that occurred. They were dealt with by the Department of Insurance. So even if a title insurance company goes under, the individual states' departments of insurance will back a policy. Very important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just one more side question here. Can you just, to some of the agents again that have not really experienced what it is to go through a transaction with the title company, what the difference between, or not what the difference, because there are many differences, but the beginning stages, the first things you look for, say, on a commercial title search versus a residential title search?
95% of what we search for a commercial transaction is the same as to what we search for a residential transaction. We're looking at chain of title, we're looking for deeds, mortgages, contact information of the current owner, the judgments, any liens, taxes, upper court judgments, lower court judgments, any federal liens. So we're pretty much looking, but at the same things. But for commercial, we may be looking for UCC. We may be making sure that.
Explain what UCC is and explain what chain of title is, please.
Oh, sure. Chain of title is when we go back 60 years in a search, or 80 years, we will present in our information, known as a binder, all the copies of the deeds, copies of mortgages, so that you could actually see over the course of the last 60 years, let's say, who owned the property. We'll show every deed for the last 60 years. That's so that you can see a chain of everybody who owned the property. It also shows if properties were subdivided. So you may be on a quarter, like I live on a quarter acre, right? But this property was one of 28 properties that was built on a cow farm 24 years ago. So those lots were subdivided. We would show that. We did a search on this 60-year search on my property. We would show the people the name of the farmer, their deed, any mortgages that they had all the way back to 60 years.
What if a deed wasn't recorded? Does that make a difference to anything that you're doing?
It definitely would make a big difference on what we're doing. Sometimes deeds, mortgages, liens are either not recorded or recorded improperly, in which case we wouldn't find them in the public records unless—
How could they be recorded improperly, Jeff?
It could be recorded. I've seen deeds recorded in the wrong county.
Oh my
I've seen, yeah. I've seen liens misrecorded in the wrong under the wrong book and page number, or recorded without a book and page number. And then it could come down to lawsuits. It could come down to the title insurance company backing any claim that arose. It gets a little complicated when documents are not recorded properly, but we've seen them.
Wow.
And sometimes, like I had a large commercial transaction that we closed on in December, and I personally drove to our office to pick up the documents and handed them to the person at the recording office. This was in Passaic County.
Smart move.
and had them give me proof. And I drove it that day back to my office, and I took pictures of it.
There you go.
You know,
modern technology in our favor. There you go. We didn't have it. What would we have done back then when we didn't have the phone capability? We would have to take a Polaroid camera. What did you do when you didn't have a Polaroid? Yeah. Crazy stories.
Exactly. You also, I know we've got about 15 minutes left. I wanted to get into this because you raised it earlier, Evelyne. You know, what challenges am I seeing in the current environment?
Yes.
The biggest challenge that I'm seeing, and we are still doing searches, we're still getting some business, although things have dropped off pretty dramatically, as we have to know, unfortunately.
Sure.
Although I will say, I'm going to throw this in there, I am very optimistic. I believe that once we get this behind us, we're going to see a very strong real estate market. The big question is, are we going to see it in 2 months or 6 months or longer?
I agree.
I don't know. We don't have a crystal ball, but I am optimistic that we're going to get back.
And you know, I am very optimistic because as recent as yesterday, no joke, I got a call from an investor in Ohio that wants a property that I already have 3 offers on. And those new 3 offers have come in the last 2 weeks. So investors are seeing this time as a very strong opportunity. Yes. Understanding that sellers are desperate. They don't want to hold anymore. They want out. They need the money because cash flow is you know, a problem right now. And so sellers still have the leverage, and people are asking me questions. Well, how do we move in this climate? You know, I have another seller in Glen Rock. I'm trying to make not a private deal, but we're not going to list it. She wants to move in June. She wanted to originally move in May. She pushed it till June. She says, well, what are we going to do? And I says, if you've got a van and a truck that you own, that's what you're going to do. You're going to move your own stuff. If this is the climate we're still living in, and you know, you can't bring the moving trucks, you're going to have to physically move the stuff yourselves and drive to your home. And that seller that's buying their property is going to have to do the same thing. But people are still, you know, they're trying to adapt, you know, and they're turning to us for those questions and answers. What do we do? What do we do? We're finding that we have to kind of almost reinvent the wheel, but give them very cold, hard facts about what to do. You know, you're in this alone. We're all in this alone, you know, as long as we still have technology and we can still communicate, that's what it is. It's communication is key. You've got to communicate with your folks right now, but deals are still being made, you know.
It's a mixed bag right now. I've seen some transactions be put on hold.
Yep, a lot. I saw like 353 that were withdrawn on the MLS this month alone, and about 200 of those were withdrawn unconditionally, and the others were withdrawn temporary or conditionally, which clearly means that there's, you know, there's still the interest and the desire once the dust settles, but the others were like, hell no, absolutely not, I'm not moving.
Yeah.
So you're getting a mixed bag, definitely.
Yes, and our biggest challenge is that the county courts have been closed. Now,
Right, oh my
because
God.
of the technology that we have,
Yeah,
and this would not have been the case 20 or 30 years ago, we are still doing searches. The challenge is that sometimes we have some additional searches that we need to do where we actually have no choice but to go to the county and pull,
yeah, sure.
and we can't get in there. So some of these transactions are being put on hold if we need additional information, but we are doing searches. We are preparing binders. We are issuing title insurance policies. My question to you all is, in this environment, how are you keeping in touch with your clients and your prospects? How are you showing homes? Is there some virtual showing that you're taking advantage of? And
Yes, NAR has allowed us to do one-on-one, or, you know, if it's family, that's first and foremost, you can show them. Otherwise, if it's, you know, an interested family that is not your family, immediate family, you can show one-on-one, one person, and in and out, you know, cleaning of the, you know, lock boxes before you touch them, handling everything with gloves, masks, going in, coming out as quickly as possible, not touching any surfaces, but showing virtually to the other side. So one side will be in there with the realtor, and you will allow the others, the person that's in there, to video and then send to the other side for consent, you know, permission to put an offer in or bag it, you know. So that is very much still allowed, but, you know, proceed with caution, without a doubt. You know, you're doing it at your own risk, but NAR has said that it's okay. We are able to do that. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, in my opinion. But
our sellers, I mean, we're all quasi-quarantined right now, right?
very quarantined.
Or very quarantined. Are sellers allowing people to come into
No.
their homes?
I have a seller in Glen Rock, and I've asked her, which she's following my guidelines, to just send me photographs that she has given me permission to send to a potential buyer. And she has had to take those photographs herself. So they're certainly not professional quality. Under my guidance and advice, you know, on a live FaceTime as she's walking the property, I'm giving her guidance on what to shoot, what to avoid, what to move, to try to get as, you know, close to a semblance of a staging, you know, as it were, as we can, so that it's represented to the buyer in as positive a light under these circumstances as, you know, as we can expect. So that's what we're doing.
I remember reading many months ago, almost 8 or 10 months ago, and I wish I knew where I read it, but I don't remember. Something like 20% of homes in the United States are shown virtually. Does that make sense? Is that right?
I love the idea. I mean, I think it's a great thing. You know, this is what we're in. We're in a world of virtual life now, you know.
I'm going to Google that and try and find that article. I'll send it.
Send it to me. I don't know what the statistics are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody here have any questions for Jeffrey? Please raise your hand or unmute yourself, and please go right ahead and chime in. Al, did you have a question?
Yeah, Jeff. Who has the right to bring the title company? Is it the buyer? Because a lot of times you have an attorney. You might hire an attorney, and then the attorney might have a title company in their office, or they share office, and kind of insist, you know, not forcibly, but, oh, I use this guy and let's go with this guy. You know, the attorney might think it's easier because they're next to each other, but the buyer might have a different preference, or the buyer's agent might have a preference because they work with somebody like you who said, I like to bring Jeff in because I know he's going to do it smoothly, and I don't know your title company. So whose choice is that really?
it's usually a negotiation between the attorney and the realtor. The realtors will often say to the attorney, I need a quality title insurance company. I strongly request that you use Jeffrey or whoever it might be.
Right.
Well, we don't usually do that though, actually, Jeffrey, with all due respects. The way it's done technically, legitimately, and ethically is we tell our buyers, look, here's the way it works, an attorney that you're going to need, or some, it depends if it's not an investor, they don't like attorneys anyway, they just close deal with title. We'll say, look, your attorney usually has a title represent you in this transaction. We explain what that title is if they're first-time home buyers, and then we say to them, you are the buyer and have the absolute right to choose who you want. And here are 3 title companies that I would recommend that I've done business with, that I feel pretty good with. And here's 3 attorneys that I've done deals with that they're all familiar with these title companies. So, it's up to you who you gel with. Go ahead and tell me which attorney you like. And that attorney in turn will be inevitably working with one of those 3 title companies that I'm comfortable with. So in that regard, it's really the buyer's choice. But yeah, I say to an attorney, if they're new, if they're coming in with the client, I'll say to the attorney, listen, I'm representing the client. They're my client, and I'm going to be working with you. So this is the title company I like to work with.
Well, what I wanted to say was that while the realtors can make the recommendation, ultimately it's up to the attorney that's representing the buyer.
Yeah. So
Even the home buyer might say to the attorney, look, I've got my brother-in-law's in the business, and the attorney might say, look, if you insist, I'll use your brother-in-law. However, I've got a long-standing relationship with this other person. So
yeah,
it's the attorney that's representing the home buyer that really has most of the say, I would say.
Yeah.
I would think that's your experience also. And also I wanted to mention, I would love to get everybody's email, because Alan and Evelyne, as we've spoken about, First American created a web app called My First Dam. It gives you an opportunity to complete searches on any property in the United States, commercial and residential. You can pull deeds, mortgages, taxes, current owners' contact information, tax maps. There are comps on the site, and it's a tremendous resource. I believe that you will love this app, and it's free. There's no charge. And I can sign up whoever I want. There are all the direct operations in the country have the ability to sign up whoever they want, and since we're First American's only direct operation in the state of New Jersey, I can sign up all of my friends in the business.
Great.
So
I would recommend all the agents that just heard that definitely share your email with Jeffrey so that you can get access to that app. I've been on it myself. It's a really good app. I use it sometimes to see, what mortgages are current with any commercial properties that I may want to be soliciting, for example, or even residential properties that I may want to solicit. I want to know who the homeowner is, the address, or any information about, their current situation. I can use that app, and it's just another very viable source for you to get, strong, reliable leads with. So definitely share your email with Jeff.
I'll do that. I'll do that after we go offline, Jeff.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
You have a question for us?
Not a question, but I really enjoyed this presentation. This has been really very interesting.
Thank you, Enrique.
Yeah, it reminded me of things that I used to happen when I was in the stock and bonds industry, and we would bring, some of the when your first examples reminded me of when we would start writing the red herrings at Goldman. And, you would ask people, well, who's got a stake in this new company that you're telling us to bring to market? And then you find out, well, and so owned this, and she's got an issue in this closet, and here's an issue in the other closet. And it is a matter of finding out all those closets. And I'm sure in the title search, that's what you really are fighting, is making sure that you've got every stone uncovered and the buyer knows exactly what he really is getting. So no, I truly enjoyed this, and I'm very interested in the app that you just mentioned as well. But it was great.
Great.
Very good, Jeffrey.
Good. Anybody else have anything else they'd like to say? A couple more minutes before we end this meeting.
Nope.
Anyone else?
Nobody else does. I have one last question. Sorry to ask so many, but it's something that Eve touched on, that a lot of investors are closing with just title and not using attorneys. Do you suggest that, or does that put more liability on the title company because they're really counting on you for everything?
You know what? When I buy a car, I wish I had an attorney with me. So I, if it were up to me, I would, I've seen so many
Well, I
problems.
negotiated this webinar with your attorney. That's how we got you here.
That's how we got here.
Exactly. So I would always recommend hiring an attorney when buying and selling.
Of course. Great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, then I just want to thank you so much, Jeffrey, for coming on today and sharing this very, very valuable information with all of us. It's extremely important to have a solid title company in your back pocket. And, you know, if you have the ability and the wherewithal to refer a title company, please refer Jeffrey. He's an amazing guy. Very interesting, creative background originally. You know, I think that your deal will go very smoothly if you do use this company. And I think their rates are pretty competitive to everybody else's. That's pretty standardized, isn't it? Yes. So there's no price gouging any, you know, whether it's this time or any time, it's the same pretty much across the board.
Yes.
So that's it. I just, again, want to say thank you so much. And, you know, I'm going to sign off very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all very much.
Okay.
Take
Thank
care
you.
now.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining
Bye-bye.
us.
The agents can stay online. Oh, they're going off already.
Yeah, I'm staying.
Hey, yeah, if you guys want to sign off, and I'll finish up with the agent.